I've tied on a very heavy linen thread, and it is a heavy, very strong linen thread, and I've tied it on to this yarn simply because it's a new machine, and a lot of you people who are looking at this video are doing this for the first time. You can just lay that yarn into the guide and thread it around, and away you go, but my recommendation is tie it on for the first few socks until you get used to laying that yarn in. So we're going to knit a couple of rows with that. We call it the separator thread, and you'll see it's coming down through the guide, and really only need one row, but we'll go two. We then break that yarn and tie our main yarn back. Now we could cut that here, thread down, and just lay that in and carry on, and that certainly makes it easier to get this out. But once again, when you're just starting off, tie it on. It's no big deal to snip that off at the other end. So we've tied our main yarn back on, and we're now going to do a selvage of the sock, and the selvage of course is the closed edge of the sock. We've got the in-out switch on out, so that's knitting. This is the in-out switch, and we need the switch on the in position, which is furthest out towards the edge of the cylinder, and that puts the ribber needles in the knit position. When we do the second part of the selvage, we will put that into out, which means that only the needles in the cylinder will knit, and the needles on the ribber, the yarn will just pass around them and they won't knit, and we'll do a couple of rows like that. But we'll carry on round, and we're now right round, and I always go about 6 stitches past the separator yarn. We then just lift this up, it's quite hard sometimes, and move the in-out switch over to out. If it doesn't quite go over, and that quite often happens, it just depends on exactly where you've stopped on the ribber. Most times it does, but if it doesn't, just take it back to in and just tap the handle around a fraction and then put it back, and you'll find it'll slip in. So we're now only knitting on the ribber, on the cylinder stitches, and the ribber stitches are just staying static. And when this comes around, you may see that happen. You can see there's no yarn going up onto those cylinder stitch, onto those ribber dial stitches. And once, twice, it's fairly fine yarn, so 3 times around, and we now close the selvage by putting that lever back to the in position, and all the needles will knit. So we come around 1 row, and you'll see now that our ribber needles are knitting, and that's a closed selvage. We've now got under there a separator thread and a selvage. We're going to set our row counter, so we just loosen up off the knob, we move the pointer around to 0, so that's where we want to start counting, and then we tighten the knob back up reasonably tight, and we then proceed to knit our 30-35 rows for a rib. We'll do, I suppose, 35 rows. Just remember, when you've set your row counter, but always keep a mental count of how many rows you've done, just in case that knob comes loose and you really don't want to lose count. So it's really just a reinforcement. So we'll go around and do 35 rows. 1, 2, 3. I like to hold on here. I like to have enough weight on the machine and hold on here, just to give a little bit of stability to the stand. Right, we've done 35 rows of ribbing. Wasn't that easy? Everybody says ribbing's hard. It's not hard. Okay, we're now going to transfer the ribber needles down into the main cylinder, and this is when your heel hook comes in fairly handy. Just pull the spring out and put the spring into the spring holder. Put the hook into the dial needle or the ribber needle. Hold the butt and pull it back so you've pulled the stitch onto your cylinder needle and down into the cylinder. Okay, so we're running out of cylinder spring, so we just crank around slightly, and we keep doing that until we go round. Hooking it into the latch, pulling it out, pulling it back so the stitch is over the needle and down in the groove. Okay, that's our last ribber needle. Just let our spring back, take the ribber off, and our ribber hooks in that nice little slot there. What I'm knitting here is a plain sock. If you were going to be knitting a rib sock, you may have changed your ribber needle sequence so that you could do a 6-in-1 rib or a 4-in-1 rib or whatever sort of rib you wanted. You would carry on with the ribber going and knit down on that sock. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just knitting a sock with a 1-in-1 rib top and then plain knitting. Very critical, make sure all the latches are open. Reset the row counter and crank away. Just carefully for the first row, so we're making sure all our latches are open. Now at this point we will take the set off basket off and discard that, and we will hang the heel buckle on. Oh, you can see that nice rib sitting up in there, just waiting to be put on someone's foot. We're going to hang our buckle on, and I must say this section is dedicated to Roger. And most people who are watching this video will know who Roger is. So we hang our buckle on and we turn it over. And I'm going to do that again. We hold our buckle up like that with the bent part facing backwards. We open it up. We pull the sock through, close the buckle and fold it over. We then hang our weights back on the buckle. There we go, our buckle's on, our weights are on, and we're ready to start knitting the sock. For this sock I think I'm going to do 70 rows of knitting, of plain knitting. So here we go. That's 70 rows. So that's the body of our sock, and you can now see where the selvage is, you can see where the waste yarn is, and you can see where the separator thread is. Selvage, our rib sock, ribbed welt, or whatever you want to call it, the separator yarn, and our waste. And we've done the body of the sock, we're now going to do the heel.